The air inside the Zalari security vessel was stale, thick with the scent of sterile metals and the faint, acrid tang of ozone. The hum of containment fields reverberated through the ship's bulkheads, a constant reminder of the technological power the Zalari wielded. Inside a high-security detention cell, a lone human sat on a bench, hands resting idly on his knees, his expression unreadable. The overhead glow panels cast his sharp features in a cold light, but his posture, relaxed, almost casual, was what unsettled the guards the most. Captain Elias Carter didn't look like a man who had just been arrested. Outside the containment cell, Commander Vaklar, the Zalari enforcers, watched the human through the transparent energy barrier. His 4 jet-black eyes narrowed in scrutiny. To him, humans were a lesser species, tolerated only because of their nuisance-level ability to meddle in galactic affairs. They were adaptable, true, but still primitive, a race of overconfident survivors rather than true conquerors. Their biology was unremarkable, their strength negligible, and their grasp of technology pitiful compared to the might of the Zalari Empire. And yet there was something about this one. Has the suppression field been calibrated? Vaklar asked, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Yes, Commander, replied Lieutenant Zystil, his subordinate. Neural dampeners are active. He won't be able to access any cybernetic enhancements, if he has them. Physical augmentation fields are at full power. He's completely neutralized. Vaklar exhaled through his spherical slits, allowing himself a measure of satisfaction. This human had been a ghost in the Empire security reports for years, an infiltrator, a disruptor, a problem that no one had been able to eliminate. They had caught him on Tarkis 4, smuggling classified data out of a Zalari outpost, and now he was in their custody. The High Council would be pleased. Inside the cell, Elias lifted his gaze, as if sensing Vaklar's scrutiny. He smiled. Not a nervous grin, not a smirk of bravado, but something calm, measured. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong in a detention center, and it sent an uncomfortable shiver through Vaklar's exoskeletal frame. Mind if I get a drink? Elias asked, his voice smooth, conversational. Prisoner hospitality's not what it used to be. Vaklar ignored the request. Do you understand where you are, human? Elias leaned back slightly, his wrist still resting on his knees. I guess somewhere between very secure and about to be extremely embarrassed. Zystil hissed in irritation. You will not speak unless commanded to. Elias raised a single eyebrow. And if I do? A charged silence filled the space. It was an absurd thing, really. A single unarmed human, surrounded by elite enforcers of the Zalari Empire. Yet somehow, he was controlling the room. Vaklar could feel it, the way tension shifted, not toward authority, but toward uncertainty. This will be simple, Vaklar said, pushing past a momentary unease. You are charged with high treason against the Zalari Empire, unauthorized infiltration of a restricted facility, and theft of classified intelligence. You will be transported to Thalix Prime, where you will be interrogated. Your compliance will determine whether your execution is swift or prolonged. Elias nodded slowly, as if considering the offer. Then, to Vaklar's mounting frustration, he chuckled. Well, Elias said, shifting slightly to lean against the wall, I appreciate the courtesy, but I've got to say, you guys really don't know what you're doing, do you? Vaklar's patience thinned. You think this is a game? Elias tilted his head. Not a game. More like a misunderstanding. Vaklar turned sharply to Zystil. Increase the suppression field's output. I want him completely pacified before we reach Thalix. Zystil hesitated. Commander, the field is already at maximum recommended levels. Any higher, and we risk neural degradation. Do it, Vaklar snapped. The lieutenant complied, pressing a sequence of glyphs on his wrist console. A low hum intensified around the containment cell, and Elias' body tensed for half a second. Then he exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if settling into a comfortable chair. Vaklar watched, waiting for signs of distress. None came. Feel better? Elias asked lightly. Something cold crept into Vauclar's mind. No human should be this unaffected. The suppression field didn't just neutralize physical enhancements. It disrupted neuromotor functions, dulled reaction times, dampened pain tolerance. Even the most hardened warriors felt it. But Elias Carter sat there as if nothing had changed. Vauclar's mandibles clicked. What are you? Elias' eyes gleamed with something ancient, something predatory. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping just above a whisper. You ever hear the phrase, caged animal? His eyes still shifted uneasily, his hand resting on the plasma sidearm at his hip. Vauclar forced himself to straighten. You are contained. The only question is how much you will suffer before you break. Elias sighed, shaking his head. See, that's the problem with you guys. You think force solves everything. Vauclar's temper flared. He turned to the nearest enforcer. Increase his gravity field to 150% and flood the cell with mild neural shock pulses. I want him weakened. The guard obeyed, tapping the commands into the control panel. The ship systems hummed, adjusting the localized gravity inside the containment chamber. The air seemed to press down on Elias, the artificial force designed to make movement sluggish, painful. Elias grinned. Vauclar barely had a moment to process the rawness of it before the cell lights flickered. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible, but to a trained officer like Vauclar, it was impossible. Their security vessel had redundant power sources, fail-safes against surges, interference shielding. Nothing should cause a flicker. Then it happened again. A tremor vibrated through the floor. A warning chime rang from the control panel. Commander, Zai still said urgently. Scanning the readout, there's an anomaly in the power grid. Vauclar's gaze snapped to Elias, who had not moved a muscle. He simply sat there, watching, waiting. Whatever you're thinking, Elias murmured, his voice almost sympathetic, it's already too late. A deep shudder ran through the vessel. Then, in rapid succession, the lights failed. Emergency sirens screamed to life. A catastrophic systems alert flashed across every console. And through the flickering emergency glow, Captain Elias Carter stood up. Vauclar reached for his weapon. Too slow. Elias stepped through the failing containment field. The last thing Vauclar saw before darkness swallowed the room was the human smile widening. Alarms shrieked through the corridors of the Zalari security vessel, their piercing wails cutting through the structured order the enforcers prided themselves on. Red emergency lights pulsed against sleek black walls, casting elongated shadows that twitched and flickered as guards scrambled into defensive formations. The ship, designed to transport the most dangerous threats to the Zalari Empire, now felt like it was turning against them. Commander Vauclar stormed through the chaos, his mandibles clenched tight. Every step he took was filled with mounting fury. The human had been in containment. He had been neutralized. Yet now the ship's systems were malfunctioning. Gravity fluctuated at unpredictable intervals, and security lockdowns were failing in sectors that had no logical reason to fail. He slammed his fist against his wrist communicator. Report. A panicked voice crackled through the channel. Commander, we've lost control of the detention level. Multiple prisoners are unaccounted for. How? Vauclar barked. How did they escape? Silence. Then the voice hesitated. Sir, it's the human. He's... The transmission cut out. Vauclar's secondary arms twitched involuntarily, a deeply ingrained reaction to stress. He could not afford to let doubt seep in. This was one human, one prisoner. This was impossible. Yet impossibility didn't change the fact that Elias Carter was loose. A sudden flicker in the overhead lights made him halt. The hum of the ship's power grid wavered. The backup system should have stabilized it by now, but something was wrong. Vauclar accessed the security console, his fingers moving swiftly over the alien glyphs. Sector schematics, crew vitals, environmental stability. All should have been under control. Instead, error messages flooded the screen. Localized gravity failure in Corridor 6A. Unregistered energy fluctuations in engine core. Security override in progress. Access denied. Voklar's blood chilled. The human wasn't just escaping. He was taking control. A hiss of static came from his communicator before a new voice, cold and unsettling, replaced the usual Zalari frequencies. "Hey, Commander. Having a rough day." The voice was unmistakable. Elias Carter. Voklar's mandibles flared wide in a snarl. "Carter, surrender immediately. You cannot win this." A chuckle. Then, with a maddening ease, the human said, "See, that's the thing. You still think I'm trying to escape." Voklar's grip on the console tightened. "What are you doing? For an empire so advanced, you really don't know much about humans, do you?" Elias mused. "You assume we panic under pressure, that we fold when we're outnumbered, that if you take away our weapons, our armor, our fancy tech, we're helpless." The security monitor in front of Voklar suddenly shifted, its interface distorting. A new screen overlaid the previous one, grainy footage from a security drone. Elias was inside the ship's mainframe. Voklar watched in stunned disbelief as the human moved effortlessly through the corridors, every step precise, deliberate. His hand skimmed over control panels, as if he had been born understanding Zalari systems. Guards attempted to intercept him, but doors sealed between them an instant before they could fire. Automated turrets pivoted, only to go dead the moment they aimed at him. Elias wasn't escaping. He was hunting. A sudden explosion rocked the ship. Voklar barely maintained his footing as emergency force fields sealed a hull breach 2 decks below. His communicator burst to life with frantic reports. "Commander, engine stability is compromised. We're venting plasma. The detention level's atmosphere controls are failing. Our weapons grid is offline." The human had crippled them in minutes. Voklar's eyes burned with fury. This was unacceptable. His species had conquered entire civilizations, had crushed rebellions without hesitation. They had imprisoned warlords, assassins, genetically enhanced mercenaries. Yet one unarmed human was turning their ship into a death trap. This could not stand. "Reroute all security protocols to manual override," he ordered. "I want every available unit sweeping the lower decks. Shoot to kill." "But, sir..." "Do it." Across the ship, armored Zalari enforcers mobilized, their sleek plasma rifles humming to life. They moved in coordinated strike patterns, weapons trained on every possible route the human could take. They expected a desperate fugitive. They didn't expect the lights to cut out. The corridors plunged into near-total darkness, save for the flickering red emergency strobes. The sound of heavy boots and clawed feet echoed, uneven in the sudden shift of artificial gravity. A deep, unnatural silence settled. Then, a voice whispered over the ship-wide comms. "You should have left me in the cell." Panic rippled through the ranks. Zalari warriors were elite soldiers, trained in countless forms of combat, but there was something primal about the way the humans spoke. Something that crawled under their exoskeletons and made them feel, for the first time, hunted. A single shot rang out, then another. Screams followed, one by one. The squad transmissions cut to static. Voklar clenched his fists as he listened to the chaos unfold. Elias wasn't just escaping. He was systematically dismantling them. Zeiss still at the command center, turned to him, his 4 eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. "Commander, we cannot contain him." Voklar refused to accept that. He refused to believe a single human could do this. He reached for his plasma rifle, mandibles clicking in frustration. Enough of this. Elias Carter would not leave the ship alive. But as Voklar stormed toward the nearest armory, his communicator crackled again. Elias' voice returned, smooth, almost amused. "You ever wonder," he said, "if you were the ones trapped with me?" And then, before Voklar could respond, the ship lurched violently, and the power died completely. The ship was dying. Vaklar felt it in the way the gravity wavered beneath his feet. The way the walls groaned under the strain of failing systems. The hum of the engines had fallen to a sickly, uneven pulse, and the emergency lights flickered in irregular bursts, barely holding back the creeping darkness. The Zalari vessel, a marvel of engineering and military precision, was unraveling because of one human. This was not how things were supposed to happen. Vaklar tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, mandibles twitching as he stalked through the half-lit corridors. His soldiers moved with him, their formation disciplined, but he could smell their unease. It clung to them like the static charge of an impending storm. They were Zalari enforcers, trained to crush insurrections, to subdue even the fiercest of warriors. And yet they had never encountered anything like this. The comms were useless now, nothing but static and garbled transmissions. The human had taken the ship's systems and twisted them into his own personal weapon. Doors refused to open unless he willed it. Security fields flickered to life at unpredictable intervals, cutting squads off from each other. Automated defenses no longer recognized friend from foe. Everything was working against them, and Elias Carter was nowhere to be seen. Vaklar's mind raced through possibilities. The human could not have planned this. Not completely. There was no way he could have known he would be captured. No way he could have anticipated the inner workings of the ship. And yet, his actions were too deliberate, too precise. This wasn't desperation. This was execution. The corridor ahead twisted sharply to the left, leading toward the armory. Vaklar signaled his squad to halt, gesturing for two soldiers to advance. They moved forward cautiously, weapons raised, sweeping their rifles along every shadowed corner. The moment they reached the threshold, the lights failed completely. Then the screaming began. It was brief. Sharp bursts of plasma fire, a strangled cry, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. When the emergency strobes flickered back to life, the soldiers were gone. Their rifles clattered to the ground, still humming with residual energy. Vaklar barely had time to process the sight before something moved. A blur of motion, impossible to track. Shots rang out from his squad, plasma bolts searing through the air, but they hit nothing. Then, Elias Carter was among them. Vaklar had seen humans fight before. Clumsy, brute force engagements, relying on reckless speed and desperation. This was different. The human moved like a ghost. He slipped between rifle blasts with inhuman precision, twisting through the tight formation as if he had choreographed their every reaction. A soldier raised his rifle. Elias caught the barrel, twisted, and the weapon fired into another guard's chest. Another lunge with a plasma blade. Elias sidestepped and drove an elbow into the Zalari's throat, dropping him instantly. The squad crumbled in seconds. Vaklar fired, but the human was already moving. His shot struck the bulkhead, scorching metal. A blur of motion. Elias was behind him. A hand closed around Vaklar's weapon, wrenching it away. Too strong. The suppression field should have made the human weak, sluggish, but there was no hesitation in his grip, no strain. He was fighting at full capacity. Elias twisted the rifle, slamming the butt into Vaklar's chest. The impact sent him stumbling back, exoskeletal plates vibrating from the force. He barely had time to recover before the human's foot connected with his leg joint, sending him to the ground. Vaklar rolled, mandibles flaring in a snarl, but when he turned back, Elias was already standing over him. A stolen plasma pistol was leveled at his head. For the first time in his life, Vaklar felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Pure, unfiltered fear. Elias' expression was unreadable. Not angry. Not gloating. Cold. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he said. Vaklar's breathing was ragged. His soldiers were gone. The ship was gone. Everything the Zalari had built, everything they believed in, undone by one man. His mandibles clicked. "What are you?" Elias tilted his head slightly, considering the question. Then he smiled just a fraction. "Your biggest mistake. He pulled the trigger. A bright flash, and Voklar's world went black. The silence after the final shot was heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. Smoke curled from the barrel of the plasma pistol, its residual energy humming softly in the still air. Elias Carter exhaled slowly, his stance relaxed but his mind sharp, assessing. The Zalari commander lay motionless at his feet, his body slumped against the corridor wall, mandibles slightly open in the way their species displayed unconsciousness or death. Elias didn't particularly care which. Around him, the ship was in its death throes. The hull groaned, structural integrity alarms blaring in protest. Emergency lighting flickered in and out of existence, painting the ruined corridors in erratic flashes of red. Fires had taken root in multiple sections, their hungry glow casting jagged shadows through the wreckage. It wouldn't be long now. The Zalari vessel was built for war, but no amount of superior technology could save a ship once its own systems had turned against it. Elias holstered the stolen pistol and moved. His body ached, not from the fight, but from the sheer focus it had taken to manipulate the ship's security systems mid-battle. The Zalari had thought they were the hunters, that their control over technology made them untouchable. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated humans. The bridge was his next stop. Not to take control. No! That part had already been handled. The ship was beyond saving. But there were still loose ends. He stepped over the bodies, some still twitching, some long still. He felt no malice toward them. They had done what they were trained to do. They just hadn't realized that he was something their training had never accounted for. As he entered the bridge, the surviving officers turned, weapons rising instinctively. It was futile. The ship was lost and they knew it. Fear gleamed in their multifaceted eyes, but there was something else beneath it. Recognition. One of them, an older Zalari, his exoskeleton dulled with age, lowered his rifle first. His voice clicked in their native tongue, but Elias understood. You are not an ordinary human. Elias smirked faintly. You're just figuring that out now. The old Zalari studied him, as if trying to piece together something beyond the obvious. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. The others hesitated but followed suit, the realization settling upon them like a heavy weight. They had already lost. Fighting would accomplish nothing now. Elias approached the central console, fingers moving swiftly across the alien interface. The Zalari language wasn't his first, but after spending years tearing apart their encrypted transmissions, he had grown fluent in their systems. He activated the distress beacon. Not for a rescue. He had no intention of being here when reinforcements arrived, but to make sure the right people received the message. He adjusted the signal, bypassing standard Zalari military channels. Instead, he routed it to a very specific frequency, one he knew would be listening. The human fleet. A deep tremor ran through the deck beneath him. The ship was reaching its limit. He had maybe 5 minutes before the reactor lost containment and turned the entire vessel into a brief, brilliant supernova. Time to leave. Elias turned, walking past the stunned Zalari officers. None of them moved to stop him. Maybe they understood. Maybe they didn't. It didn't matter. They weren't his problem anymore. He made his way toward the hangar, his mind already calculating trajectories, estimating the blast radius, determining the safest escape vector. He had chosen this ship for a reason, because he had known exactly how it would fall. A sleek Zalari fighter sat untouched in the bay, its systems primed but locked behind security measures. Not a problem. Elias stepped into the cockpit, his fingers dancing over the controls, bypassing layers of authorization in seconds. The Zalari had designed their ships to be piloted only by their own kind, trusting biometric locks and encrypted command codes to prevent unauthorized access. But Elias Carter wasn't just any human. He had spent years cracking their systems, learning them, becoming fluent in the way their technology thought. The engines roared to life. The hangar bay doors had been manually locked, but the ship's internal gravity was failing, making it easier than expected to override them. He didn't need finesse. just an exit. With a burst of acceleration, the fighters shot into the void, escaping just as the Zalari vessel began to collapse inward. For a brief moment, the ship lingered in space, its once imposing form now riddled with fractures, bleeding fire into the darkness. Then, with a blinding flash, it came apart, consumed by its own destruction. Elias adjusted course, steering toward the vast emptiness beyond the wreckage. One less Zalari warship in the galaxy. His communicator crackled. A voice, sharp and human, cut through the static. "Carter, we just picked up a distress beacon from the Zalari flagship. What the hell did you do?" Elias grinned, settling back in the pilot's seat. "Sent a message." A brief silence. Then, the voice on the other end exhaled. "Extraction point is set. Don't make us wait." "Wouldn't dream of it," Elias replied. As the fighters shot into the void, leaving the smoldering wreckage behind, he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. The Zalari had thought they could take a human prisoner. They had thought it would be easy. They had made their biggest mistake. And now, the galaxy would know exactly what that mistake had cost them.